Dennis.
Moving on to immigration and Title 42, which allows the federal government to prevent people from entering the country during health emergencies like a pandemic. It was set to expire May 23rd, but just tonight, before we took the stage, a federal judge granted a temporary restraining order to keep Title 42 in place until another court hearing. Xavier Becerra, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary, recently addressed his concern about extending Title 42. Listen to this, please.
You use migration laws to deal with migration challenge. You can't use the cover of health to try to deal with migration challenge.
Mr. McCormick, we're going to begin with you. Do you agree with the judge who is keeping Title 42 in place and keeping migrants outside the country, or is that managing a migration issue with a public health order? You have 60 seconds.
I believe that it was a right decision to keep Title 42 in place, and it's a disaster on our border. I went to our border 6 weeks ago to see what the open border policies of Joe Biden have done. They have created a huge flow across our borders. It's creating and adding to the fentanyl crisis in Pennsylvania. It's contributing to the crime in our sanctuary cities like Philadelphia. It's putting huge burden on our social services. We've got to secure the border. We've got to finish the wall. We've got to end catch and release. And this is an area that our U.S. Senator has to fight on. And this is an area also where Mehmet's compromised. And he's compromised because he's an owner of a company that hired 1,000 illegal immigrants and was fined in 2017, agreed to the fact that they had consciously hired illegal immigrants, and that $95 million fine is the highest in the history of ICE. He's a shareholder. His family gets $2 to $10 million a year from that company.
Mr. Oz, your turn. Do you support tonight's ruling, or are we managing a migration issue with a public health order? You have 60 seconds.
I support the ruling. We have a city, Philadelphia, which just lifted its mask mandate after putting it on 4 days ago. Universities all over the country are putting masks back on, locking down. My son was in medical school, similar situation, telling me firsthand how the kids don't want it, but they're forced. So if we're going to force our children, and now in Los Angeles, as you know, there's a mandate for all transportation, so people aren't even following the CDC rules. Why would we drop the obligation for immigrants who are coming into this country as part of a cartel-run human trafficking operation that's basically subsidized by the weak rules of the Biden administration? And they're running narcotics across at the same time. 100,000 Americans died last year from narcotic overdose. That's 4 times more than died of COVID under the age of 50. And when it comes to David McCormick and his progressively desperate efforts to undermine me, you're picking on my wife's grandfather's company, where I have no management role at all. However, you did have a management role while Bartos and I and many others were struggling to deal with COVID here, building the largest foreign hedge fund ever in China, which so much so that President Trump on his teletown hall on Friday said that there are some weak people, pro-China people, who would let China eat our lunch.
Thank you. Ms. Barnett, a federal judge not letting Title 42 expire on May 23rd. Is that appropriate? Or should public health orders be controlling migration? You have 60 seconds.
It is appropriate. Yes, it is. You cannot have a state of national emergency for the nation, but not have a national emergency as it relates to COVID at the border. But that is, it's in line with a lot of other illogical things that the Biden administration and Democrats have forced upon American people. Right now, we are on track of having over 4 million unlawfully present people come into our nation. There is nothing racist. There is nothing dispassionate about wanting to know who's coming into our country, where are they going, how are they going to take care of themselves. That just makes plain sense. It's not just the fentanyl, but it's the human trafficking and the human suffering that is also coming into our country. We need to secure our border by a variety of measures. We need to enforce the Remain in Mexico, enforce the first safe nation. People should not be allowed to to shop for asylum. And lastly, we need to take a strong look at the USCIS. We have 1.5 million people trying to get into the country legally, and they're being barred of doing so.
Mr. Bartos, 60 seconds to you. The pandemic is keeping undocumented immigrants on the other side of the border. Is that an appropriate way to deal with the issue? You have 60 seconds.
The judge is correct, and even Democrats running for re-election are running away from the Biden administration on this issue. That tells you how bad the Biden administration is on Title 42 and on the border. The border is an unmitigated disaster. While these candidates fight with each other, I'm running to fight for Main Street, Pennsylvania. And the sons and daughters of Main Street, Pennsylvania are dying by the hundreds because of fentanyl that's crossing our southern border. We have a southern border that's porous. Criminals are crossing the border, fentanyl's crossing the border, and Main Street Pennsylvanians across all 67 counties are suffering and dying. We need a strong border. We need to build the wall. We need to enforce the policies that worked under the Trump administration, whether it's Remain in Mexico, Title 42, and other policies. And we need to fight for good-paying jobs, safe and secure communities, and parental choice, and for all empowering parents and students across all 67 counties. Saving Main Street Pennsylvania means those three issues. It starts, in many cases, with a secure border.
Thank you. Turning to Ms. Sands, was the judge correct in extending Title 42? And what do you say to critics who insist that that's managing migration through a public health order? You have 60 seconds.
You know, we need to secure our border and build the wall. Everything President Trump put in place worked. We had the most secure border in my lifetime during the last year of his presidency. In the Senate and in the House, we're going to put those policies back in place. We're going to need an America First president to really get it done in 2024. But the fact is, we do have the biggest influx of illegal immigration, and I will just call it an invasion into our country. They're estimating if we don't keep this in place, 20% of the people living in our country will be illegal by the end of the Biden administration. That's a disaster. They're giving them cash cards, housing, transportation, phones, and benefits that American citizens don't get. We have to secure our border. We have to build the wall. And I will just say, Mehmet Oz, he actually praised the Chinese Communist Party's response to the pandemic, and Dave McCormick could never have made the billions he did without bowing to the Chinese Communist Party. You do not make billions in China without bowing to the Chinese communists.
Thank you. We have a quick follow-up.